Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Equity in Math Education Research Grants Program webinar. My name is Abby Bell. I'm the Director of Special Projects at the National Academy of Education. We're really excited to launch this new project, and we're very excited to have you here today. I'm going to start with just a brief agenda. So we'll go through some technical remarks, introduction of our panelists, then we'll dive into overview of the EMERG program, talk through the application components and tips for submitting a successful application, and then we'll go into Q&A at the end. We're hoping to leave plenty of time to field your questions. So for technical remarks, first off, we are recording this webinar. We'll repost it to the NAED YouTube page and our website. We'll also send the slides out afterwards. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and that's where we'll field questions. Again, we'll field content and programmatic questions at the end, but feel free to put them in the box as soon as you think of them. If you have tech questions, if you need technical assistance, also insert those into the box and someone will assist you with that right away. Next, we're going to talk introductions. So this is a list of our executive board members. This is the steering committee for the project. So they are the math education experts who have developed the project. They make the large programmatic decisions. And I'm going to actually have our three panelists who are the co-chairs of this committee. I'm going to ask them to each give a brief introduction. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Danny.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danny Martin. I'm a faculty member at University of Illinois at Chicago, or UIC, and I'm one of the co-chairs.
Judy?
Hello, everyone. I'm Judith Moskovich. I'm a professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and I am another co-chair.
And Alan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Alan Schoenfeld at UC Berkeley. I'm a math guy, and I'm delighted to be part of this project.
All right, thank you. And as I mentioned, my name is Abby Bell. I'm the Director of Special Projects at the National Academy of Education. Prior to developing this program, I actually worked on the NAED Spencer Fellowship for quite a few years. So I'm excited to get this project up and running from the ground up. Next, I'm actually going to turn it over to Danny to talk through our program rationale and the program goals.
Okay, thank you, Abby. I think I'll start by saying when I was told about this project and brought on board, I had a couple of thoughts, and they were why this program and why now? There are other postdoctoral programs out there that I was aware of, and this was a new one for me. But I think especially if you've been doing equity and justice focused work, there's probably been a realization that the existing research has been very limited in its ability to address some of the inequities that many of us discuss and talk about in our own work or that we're aware of in the field, especially for certain populations that we'll talk about in this project. And in the last probably 2 decades, at least, there's been a push for moving from existing work towards work that takes up issues of racialization, identity, power, culture, language, and so forth and so on, in recognition that there hasn't been much attention to those issues. So as a part of their focus on K-12 math education in the US, the Gates Foundation awarded NAED some funds to develop an early career research program for scholars who are focused on issues of justice, essentially, especially for African-American, Latin, Indigenous communities and students who have experienced intergenerational poverty. And even though there are many other programs out there, we've been trying to build the EMERG program from the bottom up in a very different way. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. So that's essentially some of the rationale. There may be other pieces to add a little bit later. And there are a lot of goals that we've talked about in some of the planning meetings, and these are 4 that we want to highlight here. One of the goals is to develop the capacity of 10 early career researchers who are doing important work with the populations that we've mentioned, Second is not to just focus on 10 scholars, but to build a community of early career scholars and senior scholars who can work together to build a transformative agenda, essentially, for the field. And as a part of that agenda building, one of the things we'll talk about is developing a conceptual framework that's going to guide future research. And we also want to use the framework and the work of the 10 fellows in the community that we build to build a much stronger evidence base for informing the strategies that the fellows or the scholars in the field can use to address the needs, the very real needs of the communities that are targeted for this effort.
Thanks, Danny. Next, I'm going to ask Alan to talk a little bit about the EMERG community and dive into the conceptual framework.
Well, thanks, Abby. As Danny began to say, and as I'll say more in the next slide, this is really a different kind of program with very, very broad goals. We would really like to establish an intellectual foundation for the next 20, 25, maybe 50 years worth of work related to mathematics education, underrepresented groups, equitable access for all, high quality mathematics, and the way it relates to people's lives. Those are massive questions for which we don't yet have effective and implementable theories. So that means, in some sense, going outside the standard math ed community and the work that it's done, even though that work has been astoundingly powerful, and operating in somewhat different ways. So the three groups that will come together as part of the EMERG community, first, the executive board, and you've seen the slides saying who's on that. Those are people who are very familiar with issues in math ed and who will be responsible for steering the activities of the group. But with the recognition that we're really charting new territory, we've created an advisory committee of people who have significant expertise in fields that relate to and have an impact on math ed. If you need to know about development, if you need to know about policy because it impinges on what you're doing, we have named a dozen different fields, all of which are essential. We have members of people of all of those communities here to help. And the way they're going to help has to do with the third community, that of the EMERG scholars. We've got funding for 10 people, early career scholars, to propose projects to the advisory board. Unlike many postdoc programs, these are not finished, tied up with a bow. It's understood that this is new stuff. We're out on the cutting edge. If I were to propose a brand new project intending to make a difference, I'd want the help from the advisory committee because those people know a lot of things that I don't. So the idea is that the early career scholars will propose projects that become part of the mix in fundamental ways. They'll be selected because they have real promise. And then the early career scholars will be offered help, not only a mentor, but a committee that we co-select that includes people who can really embellish the work so that the project is as rich as possible. And then the entire community will get together in various ways where each of the executive board, the advisory committee, and the EMERG scholars all collaborate in figuring out how we can build a better framework, enhance the work of individuals. I expect to learn. I expect everyone who's involved in this project to learn in fundamental ways. So we get to the conceptual framework. If we think back to the issues that Danny raised, there are at least two fundamental ones that we don't have well theorized. The first has to do with race and mathematics education and the way that thinking about issues of race and the appropriate enfranchisement of underrepresented students can be conceived of as part and parcel of the entire theorizing of what math ed is all about, integrated fundamentally with the way we think about mathematics thinking, teaching, and learning. The second issue is that there's an awful lot that goes on outside of classrooms that shapes who people are, what they consider to be their potential with math, whether they think of themselves as math people at all. There are fundamental issues of identity, for example, and those are shaped both within classrooms, and that's critical, and outside of classrooms. And we don't have theoretical frameworks that span the universe of people's experience with regard to their mathematical lives, their lives as students, their lives as students of mathematics. And now if you go back to the previous slide, I'm not suggesting you go there, Abby, and you think about the three communities we talked about, all of them can contribute to an extremely rich dialogue as we all work together to figure out what are the important things that shape people's mathematical lives, everybody's mathematical life. How do we build a robust framework for looking at that? And then thinking about the ways that framework can inform the way we think about what goes on outside of school vis-a-vis mathematics, the ways we think about what goes on in schools vis-a-vis mathematics, the ways we think about the kinds of structural changes that might be necessary to help give every student a fair shot at a rich mathematical life, and the support of teachers in doing that. That's a big enterprise. That's why we need all of those communities banding together, and that's what we've got planned for the EMERG community.
Thank you, Alan. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. I'm going to talk about eligibility for the EMERG program. So we've mentioned this is an early career program. So in this instance, we're defining early career as receiving your degree no earlier than January 1st, 2016. We're looking for applicants with proximate lived experience with communities of interest. So did you grow up in one of those communities? Have you taught in one of those communities? Have you worked in one of those communities? We want to know that you have a personal connection to these communities of interest. Additionally, we're looking for candidates who are committed to working in math education, particularly ambitious and equitable engagement with math. And finally, we're looking for intellectual humility. So this is different than other early career programs in that when you apply, you're not going to have a fully formed project. You're going to really come to us with an idea, and that's going to be refined with support from that community that Alan was just talking about. So we're looking for someone who's willing to have their proposed idea challenged and cultivated with support. I'm going to talk about we're going to talk next about the awards. I'm going to talk about the financial piece, and then I'll turn it over to Judith to talk about the support for the EMERG scholars. So we have funding for 10 individual research grants. These are awarded as a subcontract between the NAED and the PI's institution. And again, it operates as a research grant, so the PIs are not required to take time off from teaching. If they want to build that into the grant so they can take time off, assuming they have institutional approval, that's fine. But really the funds in this sense are meant to be used toward research expenses. So each grant is $113,000, and that includes 10% for institutional overhead, so approximately $11,000, and then about $2,000 to cover airfare to 4 in-person convenings. That's just airfare. Other travel will be covered by NAED. I know this is very in the weeds. If you're awarded the, if you're part of the program, I'll work with you on developing your individual budget. But really, we're hoping that you have $100,000 for research expenses. That can include travel to research locations, participant stipends, any technology you want to purchase, research assistant stipends. We're pretty open in terms of research expenses. Again, you'll be required to submit a very preliminary draft budget with your application. There's a template within the application portal and on the website. And I'm going to turn it to Judith to talk about the support for the scholars.
Great, thank you, Abby. So although this is a program for post PhD degrees, it's not the typical or standard postdoc, which is why we call people scholars rather than postdocs. And it's really important to notice that the scholars will not be working alone. We've actually designed multiple ways for support. So there will be support from scholars that are in math ed, as well as scholars who are outside of math education, because as Alan and Danny described, the issues that we're tackling require interdisciplinary work. That is an assumption that we make from the get-go. And also, we've sort of thought about this as having different levels of support and advising and mentoring. One level is, of course, having one mentor with expertise on the project for monthly kinds of check-ins, and we're calling that dedicated mentoring. Then each of the scholars will also meet with a team of 2 or 3, depending on the needs of the particular project, for group mentoring sessions quarterly. Those will be remote. Then because we're imagining that the scholars bring expertise, and we want both to learn from the scholars and the scholars to learn from each other, there will be opportunities for the scholars to self-select into peer mentoring clusters, again, based on their project themes, and to do that work remotely. The full group will convene, and that will be a time when we work particularly on refining proposals, because again, remember, this is not just a proposal that you finish complete in your application. The community will help refine those proposals, and that will also inform the developing conceptual framework for this work. The full group convenings happen by my account twice a year in spring and fall. So the work that will be done with the support will be refining, honing, and focusing the initial proposal, and then making sure that the scholars have support in the carrying out of the research project. Next slide, please. So you may be thinking, so how is this different, or how is it the same? We're going to just do a little comparison to the Spencer National Academy of Ed postdoc. Since it's the National Academy of Ed, we might all be thinking, oh, this is like that postdoc. So this is a little different. Applicants start with an idea. The subject matter needs to be specific to United States K through 12 math education. We're limiting it to those grades and education here. Particularly, again, African-American learners, Latina or Latinx learners, and Indigenous learners. And the mentoring will happen before beginning the work. This is absolutely what's different, in that we are not expecting people to have a fully perfect proposal, but rather beginning ideas that will be then refined through the process of working with the community. And this works as a research grant, so again, time off is not required. In contrast, if you've talked to people, or you talk to people who have applied or have done a Spencer postdoc, for those people usually apply, here's my project, this is what I'm going to do, and the criteria for looking at the proposal is this ready to go right now? Again, for EMERG, you apply with an idea, and there will be some refining. Also, the Spencer postdoc looks at all fields, all locations, and all grade levels, and that's not the case. We're very specific: math education, US, K through 12. And again, for the Spencer postdoc, the mentoring happens after the researcher has begun the work. Here, it's going to be happening previous to that. And this is not a fellowship where the Spencer postdoc, you're supposed to take leave from teaching. So I hope that helps to remember some of the differences.
Okay, thanks, Judy. Next, I'm going to talk to our online application. So the entire application process is done online. That's for both for candidates and for the letter writers. The application portal is open and live and linked on the NAD homepage. I would encourage you to go take a look at it as soon as you can. You can sign up and then log in, start, stop, save your application as many times as you want prior to the deadline. The different application components include a CV, an institutional letter of commitment, your project narrative, your personal statement, research sample, 2 reference letters, the budget template, and then just a list of pending and current commitments. And we're going to talk in detail about the project description, the personal statement, and the reference letters. There's information both in the portal and on the NAD website about each of the application components and what details are required. Just a little bit more about the application. So this portal is actually, we use this system for multiple programs. So when you apply, make sure you're applying for the EMERG program. Our deadline is September 28th at 8 p.m. Eastern. The portal will actually close at that point, so you won't be able to make changes to the application after that time. All of your uploads, so your CV, your project narrative, all of those need to be uploaded as PDFs. The system will actually accept anything else. References will receive emailed instructions with details about the program and a unique link for them to upload your letter. I would encourage you, as soon as you log into the portal for the first time, to go to the reference page, enter in their names and emails, so they get that instruction, so they get those instructions right away. It gives a lot of information about the background of the program, and we encourage you to do that and talk to your references in advance. We really want them to understand that this is a unique early career postdoc, early career program. So we encourage you to talk to them in advance and put their information in the portal in advance so they can get that, get those instructions and background information. Application components. Danny, can you dive into each of these components for us?
Okay, really quick self-correction for myself. I think I mentioned the word fellows earlier. I meant to say scholars. This is our fellowship. But yeah, the 3 important components, 3 of the important components are the project narrative, the personal statement, and the letters that you receive to support your work. And I think this project narrative probably should include the word preliminary, tentative, right? Because things are going to change. But in terms of what you do submit, obviously we want your problem description, the framing of your issue, whether it's at one level or another policy. We want your description to be compelling in nature in terms of how you again frame the problem. We're going to be looking at your initial theoretical or conceptual framework for the work that you're proposing, citing the relevant literature that applies to the issues, the contexts, the methods, and so forth. Think about your questions and the way that you frame those questions in relationship to the work that you're proposing to do initially. And how does this potentially contribute to the field? And obviously some description of your methodology. And if I were to offer just a very bit of personal advice, I would say you want to do a really good job of listing these for the initial proposal, but you want to find that happy place where you're not overcommitted because things will change. We talked in the planning sessions about a little bit about rigidity. This is my work. This is the kind of work that I do. I'm going to do this. I'm going to follow through with it. And I don't think that's going to be well received in this particular context. And that's not a negative thing. It's just the fact that we are looking at building this community and rethinking many of these issues. And so to the degree that you are fixated on a particular framing or a particular way of viewing the world or the issues that you described, that may not work so well in terms of getting feedback and being open to the kind of feedback that may come to you. So the intellectual humility is should be part of your thinking as you do write the initial project narrative. And then your personal statement, we'd like to know much more about your interest in the field, especially your personal and professional history and prior engagement with the communities that you're proposing to do the work in. Again, I would say that in our conversations, sustained is a really good word. Folks who have been in the communities, well received in those communities, have some knowledge of those communities in a very deep and profound way, and that knowledge can then filter back into your initial proposal to help you think about ways that you can tap into the expertise around you to refine the proposal in accordance with your needs and the needs of the communities that you're studying. And your willingness, as we've said, to engage in this intellectual community where you'll be getting feedback from folks who are in math education, who are not in math education, but who have particular perspectives on the issues that you raise. And so in thinking about your letter writers, you may want to approach people who can speak to your flexibility, your expertise, obviously, but your flexibility, who can look at your project in ways that may be different than your own and who can offer some insight as to why the way that you're framing these issues initially may be important for us to consider. And they should speak to the overall strength of your work that you're proposing to do.
Great. Thanks, Danny.
Mm-hmm.
And now Judith's going to actually talk about application tips in terms of audience and the evaluation criteria.
All right, so when you're writing this proposal, as any piece of writing, the one important issue to consider is who is your audience. So of course it'll be us on the executive committee, but we're going to select people also from the advisory committee. And they are researchers in education. But again, it's more broad than just math education, and there's going to be multiple disciplines. To give you some concrete examples from my area of expertise, language and learning mathematics, if I were to be writing a proposal, I would imagine that there are people who really don't know much about math education, but are committed to making a change in terms of issues of language for different student populations. So I would imagine that there would be somebody in sociolinguistics who might be reading that proposal, who may not understand all of the details of what I mean when I say things that in math education, we might all know what we mean. So again, imagine not all the disciplines in the world, but the disciplines that are particularly relevant to the question that you're asking. Particularly also, remember that we're here, those of us in the advisory committee and the executive board, we're here sort of accompanying you. We have been working on these issues for a while. We want to move forward. So we're here, and again, I don't know how else to say it, and the word in Spanish is acompañamiento, which is we're here with you. So we're curious. We're going to, maybe the word I might use is poke at things, but it will be friendly, curious, and questioning, because this is really what researchers and academics who are interested and having an impact on practice, this is what we do. So that's what we promise to do on our end, is be friendly, curious, and questioning. On your end, I'll talk a little bit more about what it means to be open to that questioning and curiosity. Again, remember that there may be one reviewer who is very close to the particular area of work, but not necessarily squarely there, because we're going to be asking people, if we imagine that there's, this person from anthropology would really be useful in informing the work that one of the scholars is proposing, we might bring in somebody and say, they may not know it, but we really think anthropology could inform the methods, the conceptual framing, how the question is being framed. So people will not be necessarily squarely in your small area of focus. My favorite topic is the last one, try to avoid jargon, so the proposal is easily understood by a broad audience. And I'm going to give you some examples, because I actually study language and communication. And so I want to kind of let you know what we mean by jargon. So the first kind of jargon that's my favorite are abbreviations and acronyms. So if I say chat, you might think it's what's at the bottom of your screen. Other people might say, no, chat, she's a Vygotsky and it's cultural historical activity theory. So just remember, some of us may know that and others might not. We do not all read exactly the same things. It's one of the things that I really appreciate about the math education community, is that we are really broadly informed by the fields that we need to be informed by. And then as far as jargon, and then I'll give you some examples. A lot of people might think that if you say language, we all know what we mean by that. We don't. So it doesn't sound like jargon, but tell us what you mean by language. If you want to say discourse, again, tell us what definition you're using. And my favorite word, register, which is really what we're talking about when we're talking about jargon, is which small community do you imagine you're talking to? Broaden that up a little bit, look up and say, oh, I'm not really talking to that small community. One of the ways to test this is to talk to your family, people who are not academics, and see if they understand you. It's a high bar, but if you can explain things to somebody who is not an academic, then we know that we're saying things actually in the most conceptual way, because we're really thinking about what we're meaning. So I'll stop. I can go on about that for much longer. All right, next slide, please. In terms of how the proposals will be evaluated, so the compelling nature or significance of the research question. This has something to do with a literature review. I know my PhD students always start with a literature review, but don't overdo it. The important parts of doing a literature review is it's more the purpose. You need to show that you know the research literature and what has been done before. A couple of things to avoid. Don't say this has never been studied before. First of all, that doesn't show a lot of intellectual humility. And second of all, I really don't know when something hasn't been done, right? It's much easier to say, these are the things that have been done. The second piece I would say is, don't say everyone else was wrong and I'm going to fix this with this particular proposal. Whatever has been done before, in a beginning proposal, we would expect you to think about what were the methods that were used. Maybe I want to pick up on some of those methods and take that up and use it just in a little bit different way, but build on what was done before. And particularly some of the definitions used in previous work, because you'll be in conversation with previous work no matter what we do. Part of the intellectual humility of that proposal will be visible in how much is the proposal in conversation with previous work, which also, for me, is about the intellectual rigor of the proposed project. Yes, it will be new, but it won't be all new, right? Oh, I want to give you, I'm sorry, I can't control myself. One other example of jargon, although many of us do work that we would call grounded theory. Don't assume that everybody means the same thing by that phrase. In the methods, really say not only how you imagine collecting the data, but also analyzing the data. We all know that in research projects, we plan to collect the data in particular ways, and then life happens, the world happens, classrooms happen, outside of classroom, informal learning settings happen. What's more important is, what am I going to do with the data when I get it? And how will I know that this data is useful for the question that I'm asking? So notice that difference between intellectual humility, it's hard for me to say that word, knowing the limitations of what I'm proposing, and at the same time saying, but these are some things that I know. I know what the data will look like that I want to have it look like. I know what I'm going to try based on what other people have tried. And then lastly, I think it's contributing to the greater EMERG community. For me, I would be fine, and we'll have to discuss this as we read the applications, if somebody said, I want to learn more about X or Y or Z, this topic, because I need to do that in order to do this work. And this will provide the opportunity for me to learn more. I've explored one or two conceptual framings. I want to talk through how to make those work for the question that I'm looking at. So I hope those examples help to think about the application.
Great. And next, I'm going to ask Alan to talk through some general application tips.
Yeah, I'm gonna largely just build on what Danny and Judith have said. As is very clear, the project as a whole is really ambitious. We're trying to change the field's conception of what is central in mathematics with regard to the lives of all students. And we don't understand that adequately yet. We've been working on parts of that for a long time. So, bullet number one, you're not starting afresh. There's a history, there's a conversation, and the serious question is, how does the work you're proposing fit in with regard to the larger picture, what we know, and where we hope this project will go? And that doesn't mean saying previous stuff just wasn't good and I've got the silver bullet. What it does mean is saying some of the previous work leads to interesting questions. And if we problematize it in the right way, I think we can make some progress. And here's how I propose to do it. And here's how I see some of those connections. So relating to the previous work, not 7 paragraphs of this paper says this paper says that, but instead saying, here are the crunch issues. And here's why I think the work that I'm proposing fits in with what we understand and where we want to go, is what a good proposal does. And that's independent of a math ed proposal. That's just what you do whenever you're trying to speak to a broad audience without jargon. Then the third bullet, we have really said a major focal point of this work writ large is thinking about the systematic disenfranchisement of certain minority populations with regard to math ed, both in schools and outside of schools, thinking about the opportunities that minoritized populations have and how we might reconceptualize them. That's not an ivory tower topic. That's something that you really gain understanding of if you've gone and worked with those communities, or if you're doing fundamental work, which can be ivory tower. If you think through carefully what the implications are vis-a-vis the larger goals of this project. So a beautifully framed project that doesn't connect in meaningful ways to the goals of the EMERG program is going to be problematic. So that the issue of saying, look, we've got some big issues on the table. Of course, I do some fine-grained work. We're talking about something that 100 scholars working for the next few decades are needed, so mine is just a part of that. But let me explain the connections, because I think I'm contributing both to that and setting myself up for a career's worth of work where I can expect to be building on these issues over years, one hopes, as a member of the EMERG cohort that's reframing things, because I've got a whole community now to help me and for me to contribute to them in addressing these issues. So there's a dance between the big picture and the ways in which you hope both to learn from others and contribute to it. Finally, all of the senior scholars have written God knows how many letters of recommendation. There's a strong temptation for overworked faculty to say, well, I wrote the job application letter for this candidate 2 years ago. I just need to pull it off of my files, out of my files, and polish it a little bit. Nope. This program is really different. The application process is really different. And the more that your letter writers understand that, and then help us understand your potential with regard to the criteria that we've discussed, the easier it will be for the reviewers to be able to see your virtues. So do have early conversations with your references. And again, remember, you're not submitting a final proposal. The question is this close enough so that we get enough information about you to say, yeah, we can see working with these ideas and this candidate, this person will be a great person to have in the EMERG community.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up the presentation portion just by highlighting some important dates. These are all on the website and in the call for nominations. So again, September 28th is our deadline for applications. We will be interviewing semi-finalist applicants probably in late October and then November. We'll make the announcement in December. The EMERG scholars will start working virtually with mentors in January, and then we'll bring everyone together to meet each other in DC in March. And then you'll actually start the actual work on your project. The first payment will be dispersed to institutions in either June or September, depending on your individual grants. So with that, I'm actually going to open it up for questions. Please type your questions in the Q&A box. I'll read them out loud, and we'll field them. So the first question is EMERG a one-time opportunity? Do we anticipate there being additional rounds of applications? So this is a pilot program. We would love to have future cohorts because we are trying to build a community. As we know right now, this is just the pilot. I don't know if there's anything else to add, Alan, Danny, Judith.
Well, we planted the seed with the Gates Foundation. You know, we said, look, the goals are incredibly ambitious. We're building a whole community, but one of the things you want is an infrastructure that has a bunch of extraordinarily talented young people, young scholars working on these issues, preferably for the rest of their careers. And there are models of that. The NSF centers, a couple of decades ago, the Dime Center, Semela, they produced PhDs, but those people went on to have astoundingly powerful careers. And our hope is that the same will be the case for the EMERG program. And all I can say is that the program officer said, interesting idea. The rest remains to be seen.
Thanks, Alan. Next question. Should the project proposals conceptualize a one-year project? Actually, it should be a two-year project. So we are, if we look at the dates, we would think the projects would begin around June 2024 and then wrap up June 2026. So you get about 6 months for the refinement of the proposal and then 2 years for the actual project. Let's see. Do you have advice on who might make good references? So a PhD advisor could be one, but for example, the next person that comes to mind as knowing my work the best is a fellow professor rather than a senior scholar. So to my co-chairs, who would you recommend applicants reach out to serve as their letter writers?
I can jump in. I have some thoughts, and I know we'll probably get a conversation going. So because this is post-PhD, while one's PhD advisor knows one's work the best, it would be good to have people other than one's PhD advisor. Another thought is that one of the references might become a mentor. And so that's one reason why, although of course, sort of the more junior people are going to be more up to date with one's work, as typically happens, a more senior scholar would be more appropriate. And also, because we're looking for interdisciplinary work, you might also want to consider somebody who may not know your work specifically in what you're doing in math education, but who is interdisciplinary and can say, yes, this person works with interdisciplinary scholars. But I want to hear what others have to say about that.
Yeah, I'll add in really quickly. I don't know if it would be a conflict of interest to reach out to one of the advisory board members as a possible reference, but certainly by reaching out, you might get some names as to people who connect directly to your work and who you might have a conversation with. And that back and forth in the conversation may lead to strong support that you could then turn into a letter that could come back to the group.
Yeah, I'll add a yes and to that.
Okay.
This is a wonderful time for you to engage in the kind of networking that you need to do in order to do the kind of powerful work we hope you'll do. Speaking purely autobiographically, if we go back 600 or 700 years when I got my PhD, when I wrote my first serious paper in mathematics education on problem solving, I sent the first copy off the presses to George Polya, the second copy to Jeremy Kilpatrick, who at the time were the gurus in that area. And I wrote saying, I'd really appreciate it if you would look at these ideas and tell me if you think they have any merit and make any suggestions if you would. And amazingly, Polya wrote back, Kilpatrick wrote back, and their thoughts enriched my work substantially. Okay, this is the time when, especially since you're embarking on work that should push you in disciplinary terms or in interdisciplinary terms, thinking about where you want to go and writing someone, quite likely they're on the advisory committee, because we really tried to reach out broadly, and saying, I'm thinking of doing work in this area, and I'd appreciate your commentary on whether I'm thinking about it in the right way, which of your work I need to know, and what I ought to know generally. That's good for you as a scholar, full stop, period. And it's out of connections like that you may well find a senior letter writer who says, I like the way this person's approaching the area.
Yep, and I just want to add to that, the advisory committee, we have a website with everyone's bios, and then we actually list their areas of expertise on there. So if there is someone that you're interested in, you can feel free to reach out yourself. If you'd like me to help facilitate an introduction, I'm happy to do that as well. Next question, do you need to have a tenure track or guaranteed long-term position to be eligible to apply? No, so the program is open to tenured and non-tenured applicants. You do need to be affiliated with either a U.S. university or a research center, but you do not have to be tenured. Another question, can the focus of the project be K-12 math teachers of color, or should the focus specifically be on math learners? I'll turn that to the co-chairs.
I was waiting to see if you had a preliminary answer, Abby, before I spoke.
My understanding is I think that would be okay, because we have people that on the advisory committee whose focus is on teacher education and professional development. But I wanted to turn that to you to confirm.
Yeah, let me abstract Abby's comment. The issue we're grappling with in the large is the question of how we can conceptualize a universe in which all students, particularly, all people, particularly young people of color who are disadvantaged by the current system, can be supported and bootstrapped productively into the math ed enterprise, whatever that means, but very broadly conceived. There's no question whatsoever that the role of teachers of color can be central in that. And that means studies of them and what they do and how they can be supported are fair game. For that and any of a number of other arenas, the challenge for the proposer is to make the case solidly that focusing on this group in the way that you propose to do so enhances the larger arena that we're looking at. But a priori, absolutely yes.
Yeah, and I would just add that in the presentation and also in the written documents, we've used the word community several times. Community in terms of the EMERG scholars, but also communities where children are embedded. And I think teachers are a part of those communities as a part of the local community, but also the school community. And to the degree that that community of teachers matter to the issues that we're talking about, I certainly could see some proposals written to look at teachers as one being a part of the community, but also having particular practices that benefit the students.
And I'll just piggyback on that to remind everybody that this, in thinking of the communities, is not limited to classrooms or schools, that learning happens across many multiple settings. And so there's no formal, informal divide. These are children's lives and they're learning wherever they may be learning. So families, homes, museums, after school, before school, weekends. I hope that makes it clear. It does not have to be in a classroom, although that's where many of us might focus in a classroom with teachers.
Yeah. Could I make one small comment about Grace's question about the tenure track positions? So we've had quite a few conversations about, for lack of a better term, outreach, breadth of outreach to who we'd like to apply, who we hope to extend our, our welcome to beyond the traditional audiences that might apply for something like this. So the tenure track issue is, Alan addressed that, but I think beyond that, we're hoping to attract people who come from different kinds of institutions, if they are in an institution, some that are perhaps less resourced than others. And so that I don't think the goal of this program is to replicate the field in some way. I think it's to expand and broaden our reach and look for those places where people have different ideas that may not have been brought to the table before. So piggybacking on that, I think it's beyond the tenure track to wherever we can find people and they can have some kind of institutional affiliation to get them into the community so that they can begin to do the work or continue doing the work that they've been doing.
I don't see anything else in the Q&A. I did have one question that came to me a couple times via email that I wanted to just answer in here. So is the program open to non-US citizens? And the answer is yes, it is open to non-US citizens, but you still have to be affiliated with a US university, research center, et cetera. And your project has to focus on the K-12 US education. Is there any other questions? Anything else? If you have a question that comes to mind later or something you don't feel comfortable asking in the chat box, my email is up there. I'm happy to respond. Feel free to contact me. I look forward to hearing from you. I'd like to thank our panelists, Judith, Danny, and Alan. We're very excited about this program. Thank you all so much for coming and for your interest. And we look forward to reading your application.